I placed the invoice on the mahogany desk. It was a single piece of paper, but it weighed more than the tumor pressing against my spine. The total was $150,000. It was the price tag for the only immunotherapy treatment left that could stop my stage 4 lymphoma. Standard chemotherapy had failed weeks ago. This was the last resort. My father, Preston, didn't even look up. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window of his corner office, letting his tailor adjust the hem of his Italian tuxedo pants. "Dad, please," I said, my voice raspy. "Mom set up that trust fund for emergencies. I need you to authorize the release today." Preston finally turned. He looked annoyed, not concerned. He waved the tailor away and picked up the invoice with 2 fingers, like it was trash. "I am the sole trustee, Sutton. I have discretion to use those funds for family investments," he said flatly. "And right now, the fund is illiquid." The room spun. "Illiquid? What do you mean?" "I moved the capital to close the deal on the Villa Rossi. For Bianca's wedding, you know how expensive renting in Lake Como is. Buying a private estate was a smarter play. It's an asset." "You spent Mom's emergency money to buy a wedding venue," I whispered. "Dad, I'm dying?" He sighed, the way a CEO sighs at a bad quarterly report. "Let's look at the ROI, Sutton. It's not personal, it's economics. You're a sinking ship. The doctor said the odds are single digits. Bianca, she's marrying into a Senate family. She is the flagship now." He dropped the invoice back on the desk. "Let's be real," he said, smoothing his lapel. "Dresses outlive diseases. I'm not throwing good money after bad." Before we continue, if you love our stories, do well to encourage us by hitting the like button, sharing, and subscribing for more. My name is Sutton. I am 33 years old, a biochemist who has spent a decade developing medicines to save others. And in that moment, I realized my father had just sentenced me to death to pay for a party. I walked out of that building numb. The air outside was cold, but nothing compared to the chill in my chest. I sat on a concrete bench and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely type. I called Bianca. I knew my sister was spoiled, but this was life or death. I thought if she knew Dad had drained my medical fund for her venue, she would be horrified. I thought she would offer to scale back the flowers or the catering to free up some cash. "Sutton, I'm literally in a dress fitting," Bianca answered, her voice echoing. "Bianca, Dad took the money," I said, tears finally spilling over. "He used my treatment money to buy the Villa Rossi for your reception. I need you to talk to him. If I don't get this immunotherapy, I won't make it to Christmas." There was a long silence on the other end, then a huff of breath. "Are you serious right now?" she snapped. "You want me to tell Dad to sell the Villa Rossi? Do you know how hard it was to secure a private estate on the lake? The closing costs alone were insane." "I'm talking about my life, Bianca." "You're always so dramatic," she said, her voice dripping with annoyance. "Look, can't you just hold on until July? If he sells it now, we lose the venue. Besides, having you bald and sick in the photos is going to look depressing. You're just jealous because it's my turn." She hung up. I stared at the screen. That was it. I was alone. I blocked both of their numbers right then and there. I went home and broke the lease on my apartment, taking the penalty fee. I sold my furniture, my jewelry, and my car for cash. But after paying off my existing medical bills, I was left with almost nothing. I moved into a cheap motel on the edge of town, praying I wouldn't die alone. 3 weeks later, I hit rock bottom. My body was shutting down. I had no money for the private treatment Dad had refused to pay for. My only option was a Phase 1 clinical trial at the university hospital. Phase 1 doesn't mean they're trying to cure you. Phase 1 means they're testing if the drug is safe for humans. It means you're a lab rat. I sat in the sterile office across from a tired-looking administrator. She slid a thick packet across the metal table. "This is a liability waiver," she said softly. "The mortality rate in the animal trials was 60%. If the toxicity levels spike, organ failure is likely. If you sign this, you cannot sue us and your family cannot claim damages." I looked at the pen. I was a biochemist. I knew what those odds meant. It was practically suicide. But I had no choice. As I uncapped the pen to sign away my rights, my phone buzzed on the table. It was an Instagram notification from an old account I forgot to block. It was a photo of Bianca. She was holding a lace veil, smiling wide. The caption read, "Vintage lace for the big day. Daddy said put it on the Amex Black. Cost doesn't matter for the perfect day. #blessed." I stared at the text. He claimed he was illiquid, but he was loading up high-interest debt just to keep her happy. That was the cost of the medicine that could have saved me. I gritted my teeth, signed the death waiver, and handed it back. "Let's do it." The trial began 48 hours later. It was brutal. They moved me into an isolation unit because my immune system was non-existent. The drug, a compound called VX9, felt like liquid fire moving through my veins. For the first 4 days, I drifted in and out of consciousness. I hallucinated that I was drowning in the lake at Bianca's wedding venue. I woke up screaming, sweating through the sheets, my bones aching so deep it felt like they were splintering. But on the 5th day, the fog lifted just a little. I tasted metal in my mouth, a specific, sharp taste I remembered from my PhD thesis work. A nurse came in to change my IV bag. She was wearing full protective gear. "How are the vitals?" I asked, my voice weak. "Rest, honey. You're delusional from the fever." "I'm not delusional," I rasped. "I'm a biochemist. I need to know the carrier fluid." She ignored me and walked out. I waited until the door clicked shut. Gritting my teeth against the pane, I dragged myself out of bed. My legs trembled, barely holding my weight. I stumbled to the IV stand, my vision blurring. I squinted at the fine print on the saline label. Active ingredient, VX9. Solvent, acetate/saline. My heart stopped. The researchers were focused on the tumor, but they missed the basic chemistry. The acetate was reacting with the preservative in the drug, creating a mild acid in the bloodstream. They weren't curing us. They were dissolving us. I couldn't sleep. The pain was still there, but my brain was on fire with the problem. I didn't have a computer, so I begged a night nurse for a red marker. I dragged myself out of bed. My legs trembled, barely holding my weight. I started writing on the glass wall of my isolation room. I wrote out the interaction equation. I showed how the preservative bond broke down in the presence of acetate. "It's not the drug that's toxic, it's the delivery method," I thought. "You're not curing your patients. You're burning them from the inside out." I spent 6 hours writing, covering the entire glass wall with red equations. I collapsed back onto the bed just as the sun came up. At 7 a.m., the door opened. It was Dr. K, the lead researcher. He looked exhausted. He started to walk toward my bed, but then he stopped. He saw the wall. He stared at the red ink for a long time. He adjusted his glasses. He walked closer, tracing the equation where I had circled the acidic product. "Who did this?" he asked, looking around the empty room. "I did," I whispered. He looked at me, then back at the wall. "The acetate is stripping the preservative. That's why the kidneys are failing." "It fixes the acidity," I said, sitting up. "Switch to a lipid-based carrier. Your math is good, doctor, but your chemistry is lazy. You're killing your patients because you're burning them from the inside out." He didn't get angry. He sat down. He knew I was right. That was the moment I stopped being a victim. Dr. K and I made a deal. We would modify my dose immediately. 6 months passed in a blur of sterile lights and beeping monitors. June 12th arrived, the day of the royal wedding. My phone buzzed with a text from Preston. "Don't come. You look too sick. It's too risky for the vibe." I didn't cry. I didn't have the energy. Instead, I propped up my iPad on the hospital tray and watched the live stream. The video quality was cinematic. I saw Bianca in her custom gown, laughing as she toasted with crystal flutes. I saw Preston, looking tan and wealthy, holding court with senators at the Villa Rossi. While they drank vintage champagne, I was drinking a modified lipid solution mixed with the new formula I'd scribbled on the wall. Dr. K stood by my side, watching the drip. We had been running the Sutton protocol for 12 weeks. The contrast was sickening. They were celebrating a union built on stolen money. I was fighting for a life they deemed worthless. But as the fireworks went off on the screen in Lake Como, something happened in that hospital room. My fever, which had been spiking at 103 degrees for a month, suddenly broke. The sweat cooled on my skin. Dr. K checked the monitors. He looked at me, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Sutton," he whispered, "your tumor markers, they just dropped by 40%. 2 years later, the girl who watched that wedding from her deathbed was gone. In her place stood a woman who was vibrant, healthy, and terrified of nothing. I was in full remission. The Sutton protocol hadn't just saved me, it was eradicating aggressive lymphomas in 94% of the trial patients. It was a miracle drug. We sat in the university legal office to file the patent. Dr. K held the pen out to me. "Your name goes first," he insisted. "This is your cure." I shook my head. "No. Put it under a blind trust. Call it Helix Holdings, and you act as the face of the discovery." Dr. K looked confused. "Why? You deserve the Nobel Prize for this." "I don't want fame," I said cold. "If my father sees my name in the Wall Street Journal attached to a billion-dollar patent, he'll come sniffing around. I want to remain a ghost. Let him think I'm just a survivor working a lab job." So we did it. To the world, Dr. K was the genius. To the bank, Helix Holdings, solely owned by me, held the rights. The negotiation took place in a glass-walled boardroom in Zurich. A massive Swiss pharmaceutical conglomerate wanted exclusive rights to the patent. 3 years ago, I had begged my father for $150,000. Today, I sat across from 6 billionaires, wearing a suit cost more than my first car. I wasn't the frail girl anymore. I was a shark. I knew the science better than they did, and I knew the value of a life. "The offer is $800 million, her CEO said, sliding a paper across the table. I didn't even blink. "The projected revenue for the first 5 years is $4 billion. You're lowballing me. The price is $1.2 billion, or I walk and I take the cure to your competitors." The room went silent. The CEO looked at his team, then back at me. He uncapped his pen. Done. We closed at $1.2 billion. My share, even after taxes and the university's cut, was generational wealth. I walked out of that building and checked my bank account on my phone. The number was so long it needed 2 lines. I didn't go buy a Ferrari. I picked up the phone and dialed a private investigator I'd hired a month ago. "It's done," I said. "Send me the file on Preston." The PI report arrived a week later in a sealed manila envelope. I sat in my new penthouse overlooking the city skyline and opened it. What I found made me smile for the first time in years. The royal wedding had been a curse. Bianca's marriage to the senator's son lasted exactly 14 months. It ended in a messy, public divorce, but the real damage was financial. Preston had leveraged his entire stock portfolio to buy the Villa Rossi and pay for the wedding. He wanted to maintain the image of the perfect family, and it cost him everything. The report showed the cracks in his kingdom. The market had turned, and his investments were underwater. To keep up appearances, the country club fees, the cars, the suits, he had started taking out predatory loans against his assets. He was drowning, just like I had been. But he didn't have a cure. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, assuming the market would bounce back. It wasn't going to. "He's vulnerable," I whispered to the empty room. "Let him bleed a little longer." It was time to set the trap. I didn't want to just sue him. I wanted to own him. I contacted my lawyers and instructed them to form a shell company. We named it DOD Holdings. It stood for Dresses Outlive Diseases. It was petty, yes, but it was fuel. Using DoD holdings, I started buying up the debt on Preston's assets. I did it anonymously, acquiring his loans from the smaller banks that were happy to offload the risk. Within 6 weeks, I effectively became his bank. I bought the mortgage on his city penthouse, I bought the lien on his luxury cars, and finally, the crown jewel, I bought the note on the Villa Rossi, the honeymoon villa he had purchased with my money. I sat in my office, holding the deed to the villa. On paper, Preston still thought he owned it, but in reality, he was living in my house. I picked up my pen. It was time to pull the trigger. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my family's doubts and executed the most dangerous phase of my business expansion, I have to ask, if you have come with us this far, it means you are really invested in Sutton's journey. Please do well to like this video, share it with friends who love satisfying underdog stories, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a part. Also, tell us in the comments where you are listening from. We love seeing our global community. Thank you. A few days after I secured the debt, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in 3 years. It was Preston. He must have heard through the grapevine that I was alive and working at the university. Since my name wasn't on the news, he assumed I was just a lab tech. The text read, "Heard you're doing well. Proud of you for getting back on your feet. We should grab coffee and catch up. Family comes first." I stared at the screen, sitting in my penthouse office with a view of the entire city. Family comes first. He didn't say that when I was begging for my life. He didn't say that when he chose a wedding dress over my chemotherapy. He was only reaching out because he was sniffing around for money, sensing his own ship was sinking. I didn't reply. I didn't block him, and I didn't text back. I simply placed the phone face down on my desk. I picked up the landline and dialed my lead attorney. "It's time," I said calmly. "Trigger the foreclosure clause on the Lake Como property. Call the loan immediately." Preston wanted a family reunion. I was about to give him one he would never forget. The collapse happened fast. 2 days later, Preston was blindsided. A courier delivered a certified letter to his office. The bank, which was now silently owned by my shell company, was calling in the loan on the villa. Because of the predatory terms he had agreed to in his desperation, there was no grace period. He had 30 days to pay $4 million in full, or the bank would seize the property. I had reports coming in from my PI detailing the panic. Preston called Bianca, screaming for help. He thought she might have some settlement money left from her divorce. "I spent it, Dad," she reportedly cried over the phone. "I had to maintain my lifestyle. I have nothing." Preston scrambled. He tried to list the villa for a quick sale, but the luxury real estate market in Italy was frozen. No one was buying massive estates in the off-season. He called his friends, the senators, the CEOs, but news of his debt had spread. Nobody picked up. He was trapped. He sat in his office, the same one where he had denied me my funds, head in his hands, watching his legacy evaporate. With 10 days left on the clock, my lawyers presented the offer. An anonymous buyer, DoD Holdings, offered to buy the villa. It was an all-cash offer, 20% above the market value. It was enough to clear the debt and leave Preston with a tiny bit of cash to survive. But there was a catch. 2, actually. First, immediate possession. He had to be out in 48 hours. Second, the sale was as is. Contents included. He had to leave everything. The antique furniture, the art, the heirlooms, even the silverware. He could only take his clothes and personal documents. It was a humiliating deal. It stripped him of his history, but Preston had no leverage. If he didn't sign, the bank would take it for nothing. He signed the deed with a shaking hand. According to the property manager, Preston walked out of the villa 2 days later dragging 2 suitcases. He stood at the gate, weeping as he looked back at the house he loved more than his own daughter. He thought he was losing it to a stranger. He had no idea he had just sold it to me. The moment Preston's flight took off, I landed in Italy. I drove up the winding roads to Lake Como, and when I pulled up to the Villa Rossi, it looked exactly like the photos from Bianca's wedding. It was a shrine to Preston's ego. Gold leaf trim, velvet curtains, statues of Roman emperors. I walked through the silent halls. I didn't feel nostalgia. I felt disgust. This house was built on selfishness. I pulled out my phone and called the contractor team waiting outside. "Bring them in," I ordered. A crew of 20 men marched in with hammers and crowbars. I didn't move into the master bedroom. I pointed to the marble floors. "Rip it up," I said. "All of it. The chandeliers, the statues, the velvet. Get rid of it." They looked confused. "You want to remodel, Senora?" "No," I said, looking at the view of the lake. "I want to gut it. This isn't a home anymore. It's a workspace. I want sterile walls, industrial flooring, and ventilation systems. We are building a lab." 6 months later, the transformation was complete. The villa was unrecognizable inside. But back in the States, Preston and Bianca were living a very different reality. They were sharing a cramped, rented condo. Preston was blacklisted from the finance world. No reputable firm would touch him after his public default. Bianca was selling her designer handbags online just to pay for groceries. Then they saw the invitation. It was all over the social pages. The new owner of the Villa Rossi was hosting a massive, exclusive gala to launch a new research institute. The rumor said the owner was a reclusive billionaire looking for a financial manager for the endowment. Preston saw a lifeline. He was desperate, and desperation makes people delusional. "This is it, Bianca," he told her, holding up his old tuxedo that smelled like mothballs. "We know that house better than anyone. We can charm the new owner. We can offer to manage the estate finances. This is our way back in." They scraped together their last few dollars to buy economy tickets to Italy. It was a one-way trip. They couldn't afford the return flight. They were betting everything on this pitch. Preston and Bianca landed in Italy exhausted. They had flown economy, a first for them, and dragged their luggage onto a public bus to get near the lake. They waited until nightfall to approach the villa. They reached the service entrance Preston remembered from the wedding planning. They shoved their battered suitcases behind a hedge, smoothing their wrinkled clothes. The keypad code hadn't been changed. Preston punched it in, and the side door clicked open. "Remember," he whispered to Bianca as they snuck through the corridor, "we are guests. Act like you own the place. We just need 5 minutes with the owner." They walked toward the main hall, expecting to hear a string quartet or see twinkling fairy lights. But as they turned the corner, they froze. The villa didn't look like a party venue. It looked like a spaceship. Gone were the warm yellow lights and the soft curtains. The windows were blasting harsh, bright, white fluorescent light. There was no music, just the low, steady hum of industrial ventilation systems. The grand ballroom wasn't filled with dancers. It was filled with rows of stainless steel tables, bubbling centrifuges, and microscopes worth more than a Ferrari. The people inside weren't wearing gowns. They were wearing white lab coats. "What is this?" Bianca gasped. "It smells like rubbing alcohol." "It's a laboratory," Preston muttered, confused. "Who turns a palace into a lab?" Preston shook off his shock. He spotted a waiter passing by with a tray of sparkling water, the only sign of a normal event. He grabbed the man's arm. "Excuse me," Preston said, putting on his best fake smile. "We are looking for the host, the owner of this facility." The waiter pointed toward the head of the room, where a group of scientists were gathered around a digital display. "She is right there, sir, in the white blazer." Preston adjusted his cuffs. "Stay here, Bianca. Let me handle the introduction." He strutted through the lab, dodging technicians. He walked right up to the woman in the sharp white blazer whose back was turned to him. "Excuse me, madam," Preston projected his voice. "I must say, this is quite the renovation. I'm Preston, a former owner of this estate, and I'd love to discuss—" The woman turned around slowly. Preston choked. His words died in his throat. He stumbled back, knocking into a tray of beakers. It was me. I looked him dead in the eye. I wasn't the bald, dying girl he dismissed. I was strong, I was glowing with health, and I was staring at him with zero emotion. "Sutton," he gasped, "what are you doing here? Where is the owner?" I took a sip of my water. "You're standing on her floorboards, Dad." Preston blinked rapidly. He looked around the room, then let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. "You?" scoffed Preston. "You own this? Did you marry a hedge fund manager, or is this some kind of prank?" I didn't say a word. I simply pressed a button on a remote. I didn't care about anonymity anymore. I wanted him to see it. The massive screen behind me changed. It displayed the confidential incorporation papers of Helix Holdings. It showed the 100% ownership stake. It showed the bank balance, $1.2 billion. And at the bottom, the signature of the sole beneficiary, Sutton Mercier. The room went deadly silent. The scientists stopped working. Preston stared at the signature, his face losing all color. "You remember what you told me?" I asked, my voice echoing in the silent lab. "You said dresses outlive diseases. You said I was a bad investment." I stepped closer. "Well, I sold the cure for $1.2 billion. And you? You sold this house to pay off bad loans. Who's the sinking ship now, Preston?" Bianca, realizing what was happening, ran forward and tried to grab my arm. "Sissy, oh my God, I missed you so much." I stepped back, avoiding her touch like she was contagious. "Security," I said calmly, "please escort the trespassers out. They are contaminating the sterile field." 2 large guards grabbed them by the elbows. They didn't just kick them out. They dragged them to the main gate while they checked them for stolen items. I walked out to the gate to sign the report. Preston was sitting on his suitcase, which the guards had tossed out of the bushes after them. When he saw me, he broke. He threw himself at the iron bars of the gate. He was crying, ugly, desperate tears. "Sutton, please," he begged. "We have nothing. We spent our last dollar getting here. We're stranded in Italy. We have nowhere to sleep tonight. I'm your father." I looked at him. He was right. He did make me who I was. His cruelty had forced me to save myself. "You need a place to stay?" I asked. "Anything," he sobbed. "A loan, a job. I can manage your portfolio. Please, Sutton, don't leave us on the street." I paused. "You're right, Dad. You taught me that investment is about value. I do have a position available. It includes room and board." Preston's eyes lit up. He straightened his jacket, thinking he was getting an executive role. "Thank you, honey. You won't regret this. I can start immediately." I signaled to the facility manager. He walked over and slapped a clipboard onto the gate. Preston looked at the contract. It wasn't a management contract. The Sutton Research Institute produces a lot of hazardous waste. Glassware needs scrubbing, floors need mopping, and the gardens need weeding. It's minimum wage, but you get a bunk in the servants' quarters. It's the only open position. Preston's jaw dropped. "You want me to be the janitor in my own house?" "It's not your house," I corrected. "It's my lab, and those are the terms. You have no money for a flight home. You have no hotel. It's this or the street." I turned to walk away. "Do you want the job, Preston, or do you want to starve?" I didn't wait for an answer. I walked up the stairs to the balcony, the same one Bianca had posed for her wedding photos. I looked down. Preston had put his suitcase down. He was taking off his tuxedo jacket. A guard handed him a broom. I watched as my father, the man who let me die for a dress, humbly began to sweep the dust off my courtyard. "Turns out Dad was right," I whispered to the night air. "Dresses do outlive diseases, but the cure, that outlives us all."
This story isn't just about a medical breakthrough or a generational clash. It is a powerful reminder that there is no single right way to view a human life. Preston struggled because he believed that financial status was the only metric of value. He judged Sutton based on the appearance of illness, rather than the result of her intellect. He missed the genius in his own house because it didn't look like success at the time. The lesson: never confuse current circumstances with future potential. Just because someone is struggling doesn't mean they are failing, and just because someone is flashy doesn't mean they are secure. True power often looks like weakness to those who are stuck in the old ways. Embrace resilience, question the superficial, and remember, the goal of life is to build something that lasts, not just something that looks good in photos. Thank you so much for following Sutton's journey from the sinking ship to the savior of her own life. It was an emotional ride of vindication, and we hope you felt every moment of her triumph. If you enjoyed this story and love hearing about underdogs who prove everyone wrong, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Tell us in the comments, do you think Sutton was right to keep her success a secret for so long? Or should she have told her family sooner? Type Team Smart Work if you think she did the right thing by building in silence. See you in the next story.